Undercover boss orders coffee at cafe, stops cold when waitress admits she can't afford basic necessities. You can't sit at this table. The voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the quiet space inside Elmwood Caf, a modest little corner caf belonging to the New Dawn coffeehouse chain. It was exactly 12:03 p.m. The June sun hit the tiled pavement outside, casting harsh theatrical light like a spotlight illuminating a moment no one saw coming. A day that seemed ordinary yet started with rejection from someone who had no idea they were stepping straight into the heart of the storm. Michael Foster, 50 years old, walked into the caf looking completely unremarkable. A plain, well-pressed ash-gray linen shirt, worn-out khaki trousers, the cuffs slightly frayed, a faded gray baseball cap, the same kind he used to wear when he was just a barista years ago. No one knew who he was. No one recognized the slow steps of a man who had spent hundreds of mornings wiping down tables, adjusting espresso machines, and hand-picking beans when the caf was still just an idea on paper. Because today, he didn't come as the founder. He came as a customer in the truest sense of the word. And the first person to meet him was Chloe Martin, the morning shift manager, hair tied up neatly, white shirt tucked in sharp. She didn't look at him long. Just a quick glance, as if she'd grown used to judging people by the shoes they wore. That table is reserved for regulars. If you need, you may sit over on the other side, she said, fingers tapping continuously on the tablet in her hand. Michael looked up. He wasn't angry. He didn't smile. He didn't pull out a wallet to prove who he was. He just stood there silently for a few seconds, long enough for the viewer to feel time slow down as dignity was tested. A few customers looked up. The soft clink of spoons on coffee cups paused. Not because they recognized Michael, but because Chloe's tone, though gentle, carried a quiet exclusion that wasn't easy to digest. An older man with graying hair was being treated as if he didn't deserve a seat in the very space he had once built. And that was the first thing that made the viewer feel a subtle but undeniable injustice, the kind that makes you want to stay and see what happens next. Michael didn't react right away. He turned and scanned the room quietly, eyes sweeping over the smallest details, a withered lavender vase in the corner, a barista yawning as she poured milk, a menu crookedly placed on a wooden shelf. This caf still bore the name New Dawn, but what he saw was no longer the sunrise. And it was that stillness in Michael, that unnerving calm in the face of dismissal, that first triggered a powerful curiosity in the hearts of the viewers. Because they began to realize this man was no ordinary man. Meanwhile, Chloe wasn't done. We prioritize regulars, those who made reservations in advance. She added, not even looking up, fingers still swiping the shift schedule. A brief sentence, but one that marked the start of a ripple effect of truth and justice. Michael slowly walked to the small wooden table by the window. There was no reserved sign. No one was sitting there. He gently pulled the chair out. Didn't ask. Didn't need to. The air inside the caf seemed to freeze. No one said a word, but you could feel something important was about to happen. Chloe Martin, the morning shift manager, stepped out from behind the counter, tablet in hand, eyes not yet meeting the guest as she spoke up. That table is for regulars. If you're just here for coffee, please sit over there or order it to go. Her voice wasn't harsh, but cold. Cold, like the hum of the AC above, not enough to cool the heat, only to highlight the chill of indifference filling the room. Michael looked up, his eyes briefly meeting hers. There was no challenge, no anger. Just one quiet sentence, I just need a menu. At first glance, it seemed like nothing. But to the perceptive, it was the first signal of a slow-burning shift. Because while his words were simple, the energy in the room began to change. A few customers raised their eyebrows. A middle-aged woman set down her coffee cup and looked up. Behind the counter, the barista paused, her eyes flicking over to Chloe as if to confirm that, yes, the man was really being refused service. Chloe didn't flinch. She was used to making quick decisions during busy shifts. But this time, the decision to deny service to a plainly dressed man wasn't just management. It was the opening move in a clash of values. The menu is on the QR code, she said evenly. We're limiting paper copies to save resources. Michael looked down. A small slip of paper sat on the table, stained by coffee in one corner. The QR code was smudged, blurred, like an unspoken rejection. He didn't move. Behind him, a young staffer named Ben Buzzcut Shirt, untucked, muttered to his coworker, "Who does this old guy think he is?" It wasn't loud enough for the whole caf to hear, but just loud enough for Michael to turn slightly. A glance not long, not accusatory, just like a flashlight momentarily shining on a forgotten drawer. Silence began spreading across the caf. Not because of the heat, not because of the air conditioner underperforming, but because of something everyone could recognize, yet no one wanted to name a person being treated like they didn't deserve to be there. Michael calmly reached for a glass of water from the tray nearby and set it on the table. No rush, no reaching for his phone. He was letting time reveal what needed to be seen. And in that moment, a subtle, deep tension crept into every corner of the caf. Because viewers began to realize this wasn't just about a denied seat. It was about an unconscious rejection of someone who didn't look the part. A man sitting near the window let out a slow sigh and shook his head. A college student who had just stepped in glanced around, hesitated, then quietly stepped back out. Everyone witnessed it. No one intervened. And that's what made the audience feel uneasy. Because they, too, had been in that situation, or had remained silent in the face of similar injustice. Chloe turned away, typing a few lines on her device. No apology, no welcome, not even a courtesy smile. And in that moment, what the audience felt wasn't just discomfort for Michael, but a growing anticipation for a shift. They wanted someone to speak up. They wanted an apology. They wanted a real menu. They wanted fairness. The satisfaction factor here didn't lie in dramatic action. It lay in the calm, precise unveiling of injustice waiting to be confronted. The audience wasn't given relief just yet, but they were drawn in because they wanted to stay and see justice delivered beautifully and unmistakably. Footsteps echoed from the bar. Ben, the young waiter in a silver-gray uniform shirt and flour-dusted black apron, stepped up to Michael's table. Tray in hand, his expression still aiming for polite, but his tone betrayed a lack of patience. "Sir, if you haven't placed an order, perhaps you could give up this table. It's usually reserved for regulars or pre-booked guests." Beneath the surface, politeness was a thin but detectable layer of bias, just enough for the listener to feel but not enough to be called out. Michael looked up. His eyes no longer held the noon light. They carried something else now, an inner brightness, still and deep, beginning to peel back the layers of what had long since decayed. "I'm still waiting for a menu," he said. Slow, quiet, but leaving no room for denial. Ben looked slightly confused. He glanced over at Chloe near the counter, but all he got in return was a cold shrug. No one brought over a menu. And the feeling at that moment wasn't just that someone was being ignored. It was that someone was being judged by a gaze that had no place in hospitality. By the window, an elderly man frowned. He held a newspaper in his hands, but his eyes were locked on the scene unfolding. It seemed he was about to get up, but then he sat back down. Just like every other time. Silent still, the most comfortable choice in a society addicted to artificial peace. Michael sat upright, hands gently folded. No movement. No retaliation. No reaching for a phone to record like someone planning to file a complaint. He simply waited. No one knew what he was waiting for. A menu, an apology, or maybe an acknowledgement from the very space he once poured his soul into creating. In truth, he was waiting for the reflection of the very values New Dawn was built upon: respect, humanity, fairness. And what reflected back was a distorted image. Bitter to witness. Ben turned away, muttering beneath the whir of the espresso machine, "People like that just sit and go." No one responded. But the room dipped a degree colder, as if everyone felt something had just been said that shouldn't have been. Not bad enough to require an apology, but enough to leave a scratch on the conscience. Michael remained still. His eyes rested on the pastry shelf behind the counter where once sat the golden brown loaves he loved, made from a recipe he'd personally passed down when the calf was just a dream. Now only pre-packaged goods remained. No scent of butter. No warmth from meeting hands. Just convenience, cost cutting, and coldness. Another staff member, Sophie, quietly stood behind the register.
She watched Michael for a long moment.
Didn't step forward. Didn't look away. Just eyes like they wanted to say something but didn't. Michael knew. He saw it. He always recognized that look, the look of someone with conscience but no voice. The air was tight like a pulled string. No arguing. No yelling. Yet every small gesture felt like an accusation. And the viewers at this point weren't staying for what was happening, but because they needed to witness what might. They wanted justice to arrive. They wanted Sophie's gaze restored with dignity. They wanted that middle-aged man without defending himself to be treated as a human being. The fridge door clicked open behind the counter. A soft sound, one that should have gone unnoticed in the string-tight silence. But the action that followed shattered the rhythm of the room. Sophie, the cashier, placed a tray of pastries onto the counter, then stepped away from her station. She removed her apron. Not fast. Not dramatic. The calf froze, stunned. Sophie was the longest-serving employee at Elmwood Calf, known for remembering every customer's preferences, the only one to receive a handwritten thank you from Michael Foster at last year's staff gathering. Her footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor. Just 4 steps, and she was near Michael's table. She stopped.
Slightly bowed.
Eyes steady, you can sit wherever you want, Sophie said. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. It was a simple sentence. But in that space, it sliced through the hushed shell of silent compliance. Ben gave his apron a nervous tug. Chloe, the manager, narrowed her eyes and moved to intervene. But Sophie raised her hand, still looking at Michael. I don't know who decided that rules should be used as a shield for attitude. But I refuse to be part of a calf that's forgotten why it exists. A moment of complete stillness then. For the first time, Michael nodded. His eyes weren't cold anymore. There was warmth in them, not because someone had defended him, but because someone still remembered what it meant to serve something greater. The atmosphere inside the calf seemed to shift. Customers at nearby tables turned to look at Sophie. No one said a word. But you could feel it, a quiet wave of support rising in each heart. And then something unexpected happened. Michael didn't say anything. He stood up, not to leave. He walked to the bar counter where the menus were clipped behind the register. He gently pulled one out, walked back to his seat, sat down. None of the staff reacted. Chloe frowned. But before she could say anything, a customer by the window, the elderly man with the newspaper, put it down, stood up, and walked toward Michael. A man like him doesn't need an invitation, he said. We should be asking him to come back before this place forgets why it ever existed. And just like that, another voice rose. A middle-aged woman near the exit stood up and said, clearly I used to come here because they greeted me with a smile. Now all I see is attitude. But today I'm staying because of her. She pointed at Sophie. At this point, Chloe began to unravel. Her voice snapped everyone. Please stay calm, this is an internal matter, but no one listened anymore. The audience now felt the shift. They saw the bottled-up tension finally pierced by one employee's courage, triggering a ripple of truth. The satisfaction factor surged not because of drama, but because the truth was now standing in the open, unnamed but undeniable. Michael still hadn't revealed his identity, but he knew truth didn't need to be spoken to be seen. It arrived on its own in the smallest act of someone brave enough to do what was right. And that was what pushed the story into its turning point. Michael Foster gently placed the menu on the table. A small gesture, but in a room stretched like the last thread of a fraying rope, it echoed like the starting whistle of something unstoppable. He slowly reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a phone. No rush, no badge, no dramatic rise like in a TV twist. Just a familiar gesture like a man who still felt at home in the very chain of cafes he built with his bare hands. Emily. His voice was calm, low, but sharp as a blade unsheathed. Activate Protocol 7. A moment of silence. Then a voice on the other end replied, Ready, Mr. Foster. HR team is en route. The regional manager has been informed. The branch will now shift into emergency mode. Michael closed his phone. A clean motion. No arrogance. Then, and only then, he slowly stood up. No shouting. No raised voice. Just the presence of a man who knew every brick beneath his feet because he was the one who laid the first chairs, wiped the first tables, poured the first cup. My name is Michael Foster. He turned. His gaze stopped on Chloe, then shifted to Ben. I'm the founder of New Dawn Caf, and this is one of my first children. That moment turned the calf to stone. A woman dropped a spoon. The sharp clatter rang out through the thick silence. Chloe went pale. Her hands trembled. Lips pressed tight as if holding back every excuse she had ever rehearsed. Ben stood frozen, his eyes like someone who just sleepwalked into the rawest truth imaginable. No one, not a single person ever imagined that the quiet man sitting at the corner table this whole time was the one who could turn the entire space upside down with just one sentence. Michael took a deep breath. He looked around the caf, a place he once nurtured as the model of the kindest coffee house in America. But now, under the stark daylight of noon and the truth laid bare, he saw only one thing, a painful drift from its original soul. He turned to the customers. His voice was low but warm, like a father sharing his heart with his family. I once dreamed of a place where everyone from any background, color, or circumstance could walk in and be welcomed with a genuine smile. He paused. A moment of silence. Then he walked straight to the bar, took the apron hanging by the hook, quietly slipped it on. The whole caf froze. Michael turned back. If you've forgotten how to make a cup of coffee with respect, then I'll teach you starting today. No applause. No cheers. Just a deep, rippling satisfaction spreading through the minds of every witness. Because the audience wasn't just waiting for an expose, they longed for justice restored with humanity, not with anger. This was the first moment of true fulfillment. No harsh words. No dramatic moves. Just a perfectly timed reveal, a clear gaze, and a declaration to rebuild value in the most noble way. Michael Foster didn't need authority to command respect. He only needed truth, action, and the ideals he never once forgot. At the table by the window, the elderly man with silver hair, the one who had only frowned in silence, set his newspaper down. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up. No one called on him. No one asked. But his action felt as natural as breathing when something right needed a beginning. He walked toward Michael. The noon light hit his weathered features, highlighting the lines etched by time. Mr. Foster. His voice was hoarse but steady. I met you at the grand opening of this branch 9 years ago. The caf held its breath. Sophie, the cashier, looked up from behind the register. Her eyes met his, and something inside her felt released. The old man looked at Michael, then turned to Chloe and Ben. I think you all need to remember why this place was named New Dawn. A woman at the opposite table in her 30s, wearing office attire, put down her cappuccino. She stood up, walked over quietly. Her eyes weren't angry. They were sincere. I used to be a part-time staff member at the Uptown branch, she said. Mr. Foster sat and made coffee with me 3 nights straight when our POS system crashed. Ben turned away. His face gave away the shock. And then a domino effect began. Gentle but firm. A college student near the front spoke up. I study hospitality management. I chose New Dawn and human-centered operations as my thesis topic. A middle-aged woman holding a fabric tote stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. I come here every week because I believe this place still carries something kind. Michael said nothing. He just looked with the eyes of someone who'd just seen a dream he once planted, thought to be withered, begin to bloom again in the hearts of people. The first silence was born from injustice. This silence now was the response. Each person, without saying much, stood up like living pillars, rebuilding the soul of this coffee house. And Chloe, the morning shift manager, once cold and prejudiced, now had nowhere to hide. She saw the entire scene as if reflected in a mirror, the clearest reflection of the truth. She wasn't alone in her mistake, but she would have to face it. She stepped behind the counter, Her hand touched the wooden bar, once the store's pride, now cold as ice. Mr. Foster, she spoke, her voice tight. I have no excuse. The air in that moment was not of fear, but of a first step toward honesty and redemption. Michael didn't nod, nor did he shake his head. He simply said one sentence, "We'll start again." From the beginning, Michael didn't need to add warnings. He walked slowly to the center of the cafe where the midday light cast a golden strip on the dark wooden floor as if pointing the way for what was about to happen. All morning shift staff at this branch, he paused. He didn't raise his voice, but each syllable rang crystal clear, are suspended immediately. A chill swept through the room, not from the air conditioning, but from the verdict that had just been passed. And right at that moment, the soft sound of a door opening landed like the period at the end of a sharply written sentence. A woman's voice called from the entrance, "The order has been signed. HR is here." Everyone turned. Emily Park, head of human resources for the entire new Dawn system, entered with 2 assistants. Her expression was firm. Her eyes didn't flinch. In her hand was a thick file sealed with a red stamp as striking as an alarm bell. "The Elmwood branch will be temporarily closed for 48 hours, she said. "We will review all service processes, training quality, and customer interaction standards here." The silence lingered. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was mutual understanding without words. Michael slowly walked toward the bar. He placed both hands on the wood where years ago he first set down a white ceramic cup bearing the new Dawn Cafe logo. "It's not because you don't know how to make coffee," he said, his eyes landing on Chloe and Ben. "It's because you've forgotten how to look someone in the eye without judgment. No sobbing, no pleading. Only Chloe, head bowed. Only Ben, eyes down, shoulders trembling.
A tremble deeply human and real.
At that moment, the audience could feel that justice had just been restored, not through punishment, but through confrontation. And that quiet, resolute clarity created a deep satisfaction factor. The wrongdoers were named, the system didn't stay silent, and hearts were lit by the light of understanding and necessary boundaries. Emily nodded at Michael, then turned to address the cafe. "We ask all customers to leave the store so we can begin inventory and temporarily shut down the system. If any of you have feedback about your experience today, we are listening either in person or via the email printed on your receipt." No one protested. A few patrons quietly rose from their seats, not out of outrage, but because they had just witnessed a cultural reckoning from the very top in a way they would never forget. A 12-year-old girl sitting with her mother near the door slowed her steps.
She turned back to look at Michael.
"You're a good man," she said, then turned again as if her words needed no further explanation. Michael gave a slight bow. He didn't reply, because he knew real change isn't held in the announcements he just made, but in the eyes of those who would carry this story forward. As the last guests stepped out, the glass door closed quietly behind them, leaving behind a space that felt strangely silent and empty. For the first time in years, Elmwood Cafe stood still, no laughter, no clinking spoons, no familiar voices calling out orders. Michael didn't leave the counter right away. Instead, he removed the watch from his wrist and placed it gently beside the espresso machine. A small gesture, but one that felt like he was about to roll up his sleeves for something truly serious. He turned to Emily. "I need a list of all employees at this branch, both morning and evening shifts," he said. Emily handed him a printed sheet. Michael didn't rush to read it. He ran his fingers down each name slowly until he stopped at the last line. "Sophie Hayes," he read aloud. A deep breath. Then he turned toward the back room. "Is Sophie still here?" A soft knock echoed from behind the kitchen door. Sophie, the same staff member who had stood quietly all this time, stepped out, her glove still on her, expression unsure, but her eyes quietly waiting. Michael walked toward her. He didn't smile, nor did he frown. Only a calm presence, profoundly human. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked.
Sophie hesitated.
Then spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, "Because everyone thinks they can't change anything, sir." The silence that followed settled deeply in the room. Michael nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He turned to Emily. Make a note for me. Sophie Hayes promoted to Regional Quality Assistant Supervisor. Effective immediately. The room froze.
Sophie's eyes widened.
But I've never managed anyone. I'm just Michael, gently interrupted, firm yet kind. You're the only one today who saw something wrong and didn't turn away. You deserve this. That single sentence, like the slow turn of a key unlocking something long dormant, opened a door in the audience's hearts. Because no one expected a quiet, unrecognized employee to be lifted up simply because she held on to her integrity. For the viewer, it was a deeply satisfying emotional moment, not just punishment, but reward given at the right time to the right person. Justice wasn't just about removing the bad, but making space for the good to rise. Emily swiftly processed the paperwork.
Sophie still couldn't believe it was real.
But Michael's eyes confirmed it. This wasn't a favor. It was the system correcting itself with people who had earned it. At the far end of the counter, a small plaque flipped down from behind the pastry shelf staff of the month, this spot reserved for integrity. Michael stepped forward, removed the old name still hanging from the previous month, and replaced it with a new tag, Sophie Hayes June. There was no applause, only Emily gently nodding, and an elderly janitor in the corner quietly wiping away a tear with the back of his hand. As Michael stepped toward the front door, his hand brushed the cool metal of the handle. Then a voice soft as breath called from behind. Surrey turned. Sophie, her brown hair tied back, still wearing her apron, stood there. Her hands clasped together, eyes cast downward. But her voice, for the first time that day, carried something that could no longer be hidden, the first fragile spark of belief. I only work part-time, but with the current tip split, I can't afford 2 meals a day. I'm a sophomore, and this is the 3rd week I've survived on instant noodles. No one spoke. Even Emily, who was used to payroll sheets, HR dashboards, and KPI charts, stood still for a moment. That sentence wasn't loud, but it pierced the room like a needle through velvet, small, yet sharp enough to reveal the soft cover could no longer hide what lay beneath. Michael stood still. His gaze wasn't stern, nor sorrowful. It was a quiet look, as if he had just heard the faint cracking of a roof he once believed was solid. He stepped forward, stood in front of Sophie, less than an arm's length away. Tomorrow, his voice was steady, certain. No promises, no flourishes. You'll be the first person in the new training class. Sophie looked up. Tears welled in her eyes. Michael continued, not because you need help, but because you deserve to work in a place where you're not forced to choose between a meal and a diploma. That was all. And like an unscripted reaction, an elderly man near the window placed his hand on the table and gave the first slow, measured clap. Another. Then another. Then the whole calf, the very people who had earlier turned away out of fear or discomfort, now applauded. Not for someone who left, but for the right thing finally being said and acted upon. It wasn't applause for a CEO. It was for a man who truly listened when no one else was expected to care. Michael gave a slight bow, then turned away. His hand opened the door. A breeze rolled in from the street, carrying the soft jingle of an ice cream cart down the block. On the table near the window, where an old menu lay open, a single page fluttered up, turned once in the air, and settled like a silent farewell. No one said a word, but everyone knew an era had just closed, and a new one had begun. No ribbon cutting, no champagne, only a silent promise from the founder himself: from this day forward, fairness will be served with every hot cup of coffee every morning. Fairness isn't a slogan on the wall. It's how you greet a stranger with the same respect as family. A true CEO doesn't just read reports. He notices the employee still trying to smile even on an empty stomach. The right recognition sometimes needs no prize, only listening action and the courage to offer a chance. And in a world that rushes too fast, pausing to ask, "Are you okay?" is the highest form of humanity.